Hey everybody, today we are going to be going over my completed reptile wall. As you can kind of see right now, it looks pretty awesome, and we can go through each enclosure and see who's there and check out the actual enclosures themselves, which are made by AP Cages. This isn't sponsored or anything like that, but I did ask their permission to name them in the video and their model of enclosures, because all of the enclosures are through AP Cages. So let's go in and start checking out with some of the easier reptiles. We're going to start here in my gecko cages. These are the AP Cage model A4 enclosures, which work out phenomenally well, have great sliding or opening or sliding glass or retractable regular door panels. But this is Mushi. Mushi is my 3-year-old Leachianus gecko that I got from Kevin McCurley and the team at Nerd. So we can see here kind of chilling out there. One thing that I was actually surprised on is the fact that the geckos are able to actually go in and still cling to the PVC. I did put extra cork bark into the enclosure thinking that they would need it, but they actually don't, which works out phenomenally well. And then we just have some leftover food from last night. And then with their enclosures, what AP Cages can do for you is install this in-mounted lit LED panel. Really, really awesome, and a big improvement over how they used to do it, which was attaching like an LED tube bulb style system on some of their older models. So this is a really, really great option. Though when I noticed how it was placed, that interfered with my heating panel. So what I actually did is I have my heating panel here on the bottom. This is a Vivarium Electronics heating panel. They're in a few of my enclosures, but I have switched to a different company now because after the whole COVID lockdown and all that, Vivarium Electronics has been sold out of all of their heat panels everywhere. So that's been kind of difficult to get to. So next we head over, we got cool, awesome Lego Stormtrooper helmet. And then in this enclosure, same kind of scenario with the heating panel, is Deadpool, who is my 3 to 4-ish year old gargoyle gecko. So let's see if we can get him to be a little bit more visible for everybody. So he is in light phase right now. He is a red line gecko. So let's try to maneuver him around a little bit, see where he wants to go. So I absolutely love the marbleization in their eyes, and you can see that red bar coming down on his back. When he's in light mode, those the red spottings on his stripes are separated, but when he's in dark phase, those will actually be solid red, which is very, very cool. And I got him from Mr. Brian Barchek at BHB Reptiles. Next in this enclosure, which is the Animal Plastics T10 enclosure, which is a very, very awesome enclosure. This is one of like the greatest size enclosures because it's able to fit a lot of variants of smaller snakes very, very, very easily. So in this enclosure, I have Severus, who is my IMG Motley Jungle that is het for Anery, Sharp Albino, and Caramel Albino in this enclosure. So his works out really, really nicely. You can see him, he's here, he's a good boy. All the snakes did just have feeding day about 3 or 4 days ago, so he's got a little bit of a food belly going on. He is currently eating triple XL rats, or sorry, not triple XL, extra large rats. And with that, it works out pretty well to one meal every 2 weeks or so. You definitely do not want to overfeed them, especially once they hit adult age. And for this enclosure, I am using a newer style of heat mats that I've been using, and these are made by Kane. The awesome thing with Kane heat mats is they're primarily designed for a farm or more like an industrial use. One of their big like selling points is using them as like pig beds and stuff. But when you have them hook up to a thermostat and you have just a fairly thin layer, I've got about an inch of substrate with it being lightly packed down. It's able to hold the heat and humidity in the enclosure much better, which is very handy. On this enclosure, I did have to install a 1/4 mil thick, 1/4 inch thick piece of just kind of your foam liner to help kind of block off this bit a little bit because during the winter he was trying to rub in and wanted to get to the female enclosure, and that's what caused his little bit of nose rub. So having this little bit of weather stripping in here has completely stopped that and has stopped any more attempts of him wanting to get with my big female. Only downside, it does make opening the door from the left-hand side a little bit trickier. As you can see, I had a little bit more effort opening and closing it versus the right side door. But that is going to be it for Severus. Now when we come down here, this is going to be the big piece de resistance enclosures. And these are Animal Plastics T65 enclosures. So these are some of their largest enclosures at 8 feet long. And inside this one, I have Viserion, or Viz for short. Obviously, if you're familiar with the name, it's a Game of Thrones theme. And he is a Super Fire Tiger reticulated python that I got from Bob Clark over at Bob Clark Reptiles. And he is absolutely incredible. He is one of my most amazing snakes. I absolutely love his intelligence. You can see he's just coming out and wanting to see what's going on. He's like, "Hey Dad, what's up?" And they're very inquisitive and show that so much higher level of intelligence that you don't normally see in something like a boa. So boas are smart, yes, they're clever, but they are also kind of stubborn and kind of a little bit doofy at times. Retics show much more intelligence to where, while he's only about 2 years old, I've gotten him pretty handled to where, granted he's a little skittish this morning, but I can go in and still pet him and be okay, and it's not going to be anything super dangerous. He also is a little agitated because he did have his meal as well, which is 2 triple XL rats. You can see that nice food belly there. And when I do these feedings for him, I do that feeding every 3 weeks. So I don't want to, again, you don't want to overfeed your snakes or anything like that. So when you give them a big meal like this, give them a longer time to rest. And with that, they'll go into shed, they'll do really nicely and work out well. In this enclosure also, I am using the Kane heat panels as well. This is actually a 4-foot long heat panel that is 27 inches deep versus the 30 of the enclosure. So well, it fits basically this front or this left half of the enclosure perfectly. And then I just have a hole drilled out for the power line and the line for my LED lighting. And same as with Severus's enclosure, even though this is an 8-foot long enclosure, these panels are able to heat up really well. And what's best is you're able to deliver that really nice belly heat. So you don't have to have, versus like a top mounted enclosure where you have a thermostat set to 88, 86 degrees and it's really, really hot in the whole enclosure. Or if it's not really hot, you've got a lot of extra hot air in there. With the Kane panels, I've found that they hold the humidity well, and by doing that extra belly heat, you can drop your thermostat a couple degrees and it still works phenomenal with them. I'm not talking a huge jump like dropping it 5 or 10 degrees, but a 2-3 degree lowering with the substrate on there works phenomenally, and you're not going to get any sort of scale burn or anything like that at all. But we're going to close him up and again let him rest. And then we're going to go to the bottommost enclosure, and this is my baby girl. This is the first boa first reptile that I have ever owned. And this is Selene. She is in another T65 enclosure. Same exact setup as Viz. I just kind of changed around some of the stuff, and some of her ornamentation is stuff she's had in every one of her enclosures since she was a baby, 9 years ago, like this dragon skull. So while, yeah, it's really small now, when she was a tiny little baby, she used to tuck herself in here. Now her head doesn't even fit in there. And she is my beautiful girl. She is absolutely great. She's about 10.5 to 11 feet long and weighs about 60 pounds. She had a big meal as well. She just had a frozen thawed 2.2 pound rabbit. When it comes to feeding with her, because again, she's full grown too, and I do not do normal breedings. I've only bred my snakes once, and that was Selene with Severus. And it worked out fabulously, but it's not something I plan to do long term. But with her feedings, when she gets that nice good sized rabbit, that's her food for the month. I definitely don't want her getting fat or anything. I want her to have kind of the best life possible. So she'll get that nice good sized meal and then have a good month to properly digest it, and then evacuate her bowels and everything, make sure everything's all good, and then she'll be good to go for the next one. One thing I did forget to notice or talk about with Severus's enclosure, or not Severus's, Visarion's enclosure, is I have a much bigger water basin in here compared to all the other reptiles. I found the boas really don't soak too much. I mean, they'll soak a little bit, like as babies the boas would soak. But as adults, they really don't soak much. They don't like being completely submerged or completely in water. So having these decently sized water containers for the enclosures, so this for Selene, and we go up here and have this one over here for Severus, that works great. With reticulated pythons, they like the water a lot more, especially when they are going into shed. So after this digestion, Viz will be probably going into shed again. I mean, he's a young snake, he'll be shedding a lot. I found that having the larger basin, giving him more space to soak, has actually done wonders for helping him with sheds. So that's why he will always have a larger water basin in there so he can fit better. Granted, when he is full grown, we'll have to do outside big soak baths. But when he's not massive, having the larger fixture in here works great. And then we're going to go up from this, and then this is Quicksilver. So Quicksilver is actually one of my babies from Severus and Selene's clutch that I had. And this is another one of the AP Cages T40s, the awesome 4-foot enclosures, same size that Severus is in. And with Quicksilver, I'm not quite sure how his genetics popped out. So again, he was bred with Selene, and she's just an albino red tail. I got her from Triple L Reptiles. So mixing that albino with the IMG Motley Jungle, Het albino, Sharp albino, and the Anuary that Severus has, we've gotten a really awesome patterning here. We've got the really, really dark tail, so I'm inclined to believe we've got some of the IMG gene in here. But what's great is Quicksilver's color hasn't phased out like Severus's did when he was this age. So the babies now are almost 2 years old, and their pattern has not changed. So we've got these amazing silver scales on the sides, and then going down to a really, really clean black tail with those clean saddles on there. So he was definitely one of my really nice holdbacks. And then last of the snakes is Lunar, which initially was named Luna for the Harry Potter series until he found out that it was actually a male, and then we switched it to Lunar. So out of all of my snakes, Lunar is the one that's, funnily enough, most intimidating. He's another one of the babies from the clutch with Selene and Severus, and once he's out of his enclosure, he's perfectly fine. Unless you're an extremely animated talker, then you might get struck at a little bit. When he's inside his enclosure, he is not very happy. So he's got those constant tongue flicks. If you look at his body, he's kind of hissing and posturing all up. So I mean, he does not like being bothered. So it works out pretty decently because while he doesn't like being bothered, once he's out, he does calm down. So it's just some cage defensiveness, and we can kind of get him out of that once he gets a little bit bigger and a little less afraid of everything quicker. And we can still work on it now already and just kind of keep getting him that little bit better. So I know how far he can go. He knows how far I'll go. So it's a pretty decent understanding. But at the same time, if I do something stupid, he's the one I am most likely to get bit by out of any of my other snakes or reptiles. So we close that up. And then for heating with both Lunar and Quicksilver, I have these larger, older model Vivarium electronics heating panels on the top, which work out really, really well. But again, you have to have that temperature up a little bit more. So in here, I've got it around 86 degrees to 88. I normally turn the temperature up a little bit more when we get towards summer, and then down just a couple degrees in the fall, winter, and spring. And it's not any sort of brumation or anything like that. I think just a 2-degree change would be something kind of interesting for them to let them know the season's changing, which works out really, really nicely. So now if we go in and want to see how we're running all of this, I've actually got it set up with Vivarium Electronics thermostats. So the geckos, you can see that I've got them at 78 degrees. And their probe is actually right at the bottom near the actual heat panel itself. So while the geckos don't need something really, 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 really hot, in these enclosures, because of the heat rising, this actually works out really well for them, and they seem to be loving it so far. For my male boas, which again are Lunar, Quicksilver, and Severus, because they are all in the same size enclosure, same wattage of heating, I've got them set at 86, just because of opening the doors and everything, with the probe being right there on Quicksilver's enclosure. It did drop a little bit. And then for Viserion and for Selene, I have them at 84 degrees, and it works at holding that really well. You can see it's pulling 83 right now, though inside my house, windows open and 68 degrees right now. So that's a really decent heat pump, which works out nicely. And then I have everything smart homed using Google Home devices. The reason I have that is all my lighting. So all of my enclosures lighting, minus the geckos, are actually using the Philips Hue light bar. So this is I believe it's 3.3 meter light bar, or 3.2 meter light bar. Now you can go around in the high humidity enclosures. I use just a little piece of duct tape because sometimes the 3 mil doesn't hold right. So add a little piece of duct tape there, works out great. And with that, I can control the brightness. I can change the colors of the enclosures. And when that gets really interesting is when you look at blue. So what lights most often do you think of when you think of a blue light? It's going to be a black light. So with black lights, you're able to see a lot of extra pattern that comes out versus under regular light. So when I go, hey Google, set the reptile wall to blue, it'll take a couple seconds, and then all my enclosures will change. And now, take Quicksilver here. You can see a lot more of that pattern popping out and get a very different look at the snake itself. So it's a really cool thing. Not all of the snakes have that kind of extra show, like Severus really doesn't do much. Viserion looks phenomenal. All of his whites are extenuated out and made a lot brighter. You can see a little bit more of the opalescence in his head. And overall, it's a really awesome look to definitely not permanently, but to kind of show off your animals a little bit more. Because Selene is one of my favorites in this case. Albinos under blue light is one of the coolest colors that I've ever really seen. Because you get a lot more of that patterning out. So even if I tone down the blue just a little bit, now you're looking at all the saddles and all the bright white in her saddles coming out, and you can see almost a complete difference in her coloration. And it works out fantastically, and it's a really cool thing to demo, and it's a fun thing to have because of the fact that these are smart lights and they are LED. So they're not expensive. They're not running you a lot of money to have lit up, but they give you cool kind of little side, oh, hey, check that out type things. And then I can fix it just by going, hey Google, set the reptile wall to bright white. And now I'll switch all the lights back, and now we're back to your normal panels. So that works out really well. It kind of shows some extra coloration in the animals. And then if we go and look over here is where I've kind of got the setup of my kind of tools of the trade, so to speak, to where I've got my forceps for feeding at awkward angles if I decide not to feed by hand, just to be certain. should really always feed with tongs. It is safer and a little bit easier, especially in lower height enclosures. And with snake strikes, they're not always accurate. So tongs definitely help you from getting nipped. This is actually just a cool little gecko lizard ornamentation that my dad got me, so he's now the holder of all the reptile stuff. So you always want to have snake hooks too. This is just a really cheap extendable snake hook, and I just kind of leave it at this extent because it's got enough left in each bar to where they can have a little bit more weight behind it. So I will use that with the smaller snakes and kind of give them just a light little boop on the top of the head to let them know, hey, it's not food time, it's time to come out, or it's time just to hang out. And they're able to know that and recognize that, and it works out phenomenally. Then we go over to the large snake hook for the large snakes. Primarily, this is for Viz. Selene doesn't need a snake hook at all. She's pretty much just a big, giant meat noodle. Viz, on the other hand, he was a little cage defensive at first and would go through his fits of striking anything that moved once the enclosure opened. Now he's gotten much more gentle, so I don't have to use the snake hook as much, but again, good to have. And one of my most favorite tools, temp gun. Always good to have a temp gun. I don't like to use the, let me show you, the kind of in enclosure heating and humidifying and all that stuff. Can't really take this one down anymore because it's super glued to the enclosure. But they deteriorate in their effectiveness over time to the point where they get completely inaccurate. So having even just a basic $20 little heat gun works phenomenally and will give you a much more accurate reading of the temperatures in your enclosures. And then we've got the pooper scooper. Yay, pooper scooper. So that is it, everyone. That is my reptile wall. Thank you all for watching. And if you have any questions with Animal Plastics, they have a great customer support team. And honestly make some of the best looking enclosures that I've ever used. Well, not really ever used, but ever seen personally. And really do like them. All right, so everybody have a great day and be nice to someone. Bye.